Coogs House. The Houston Cougars have a lot on the line as they march into Lawrence, Kansas, and the famous Allen Fieldhouse this Saturday. That's okay because they're going to win.
You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Coogs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to stop by, and I think there's going to be a few of those this weekend, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way, listen to Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Coogs your first listen of the day. If you're on YouTube, welcome back to that YouTube channel. Hit subscribe. Help us to the next 250 mark that is at 2,000. That's a big one. We're actually almost there. Hit subscribe. Help us get there. Like, comment the videos. Let us know you're in the contest. You want to get something at that giveaway at 2,000. And if you don't know what to say after hearing about Houston and Kansas this Saturday, you've heard 2 episodes at this point about Houston and Kansas potentially from me. You're like, I just don't know what to say about this one. Tell me in the comments down below, which sock do you put on first, left or right? If you want to add why, feel free. Now, today's episode is going to be doing a couple of different things. We're going to look at previewing this game. Now, earlier today, we had a preview out. It was a crossover episode with Derek. Derek does Locked On Jayhawks. That was a very good conversation. 2 very strong programs going back and forth, talking about basketball this season, getting ready for the game this weekend, and what could happen on the basketball court, right? Now, I want to talk a little bit about this game from a purely Houstonian perspective, and what the Cougs have on the line. That's the first segment, just what is at stake in this game this weekend for Houston. It's kind of a lot. The second segment, I want to talk some about Kansas at this point. Derek did a good job in the preview as well, so I don't mean to steal his thunder. But I think there's some things that as a Houston Cougar person, we need to make sure we're paying a little attention to as they go. And then last but not least, I always like to, as a high school basketball coach, go through and check out what matchups can happen or could happen and how that could impact who is that X factor, who plays a key role in this game. But first, let's be sure we talk about what is at stake in this game. And in a very literal sense, this game is a conference championship game. In a very literal sense, this game is for Big 12 supremacy, being in charge of the Big 12. Currently, Houston's kind of neck and neck with Texas Tech atop the conference. Kansas is trying to climb their way back up to get there after taking a couple stumbles early. More on that in the second segment. But the interesting thing about the current Big 12, or this iteration of the Big 12, is you don't play everyone twice. The schedules aren't all equal. And Houston has to go to Kansas and have Kansas come home. Texas Tech gets Kansas once in Lubbock. Texas Tech had to go to Houston. Terrible, difficult road trip. They don't only have to see them one time. And Texas Tech is a really easy schedule at the gate. Now, if you listen to the show for a long time, they got family in Lubbock. I don't mean this as super pejorative, but Texas Tech is 100% benefiting from, relatively speaking, within the Big 12, as easy a schedule as you can get. And Houston is going to have to kind of punch and throw some knockout punches at these big high weight class schools to make sure they keep pace, because Texas Tech bluntly doesn't have to. They're not the only team that'll be that way by the end of the season. I don't mean to say that, but currently that's how it goes. And that's going to be interesting to see. Now, yes, I know that in the Big 12 conference tournament, it turns into a bunch of one-game samples. And if Tech had the 1 seed going in, that does not mean they make out of the first day. But I also think there's something to say about having that potential easier path in the conference tournament with the gauntlet that is. We saw last season, Houston did, how having to play your guys a lot of minutes in those times can lead to real injuries. And make sure you have as good a path at that point for your team as you can going into the big March Madness tournament. In a more metaphorical sense, I promise I speak English. Houston's strength of schedule isn't as good as it could have been. I think there's part of that's not necessarily their fault. They schedule A&M thinking it's an SEC team in the state of Texas, and Wade Taylor, and a lot of respect for Coach Buzz down there and what they got building, and they're just not having as good a year as they could have, right? Frankly, go to Charleston and you play more mid majors than majors, just because kind of way the tournament shook out. Now, Dayton's really good. Utah's really good. You and I both know that. Xavier's really good, even though they've had a couple of speed bump stumbles of their own. As a program, they're really good. But they don't have a bunch of sexy, they didn't play Alabama this year like they did last year, right? They don't have those kinds of games in their non-conference. They were relying, because they could, on the Big 12 conference. Well, now those conference games are here. Now, if that's the argument, it's time to go win those conference games. And there's no bigger road test than the one in Lawrence. Um, as far as reputation goes, I also think something to say about Houston and road wins this year, because they're kind of lacking. Their two losses were both conference road games, the first two conference road games out the gate. I would argue in two other conference road games, both BYU and Texas, they were kind of pushed to their limits. BYU gave Houston all they could handle in the second half of that game, shot the ball very well down the stretch, although not as well as they average shoot, honestly, and that's been interesting. Texas had an incredibly well done comeback against Houston, pushed the game to overtime, and again, Houston got out of there. I argued escaped with a win, right? Now, obviously, a win is a win, and it's always better to win ugly than to lose pretty. But I think that's an interesting trend to watch. And Kansas is as difficult. I mean, Sampson himself said it, as difficult a road environment as he's ever seen in his whole coaching career when he was at Oklahoma coaching against Kansas. So it'll be interesting to see how that does. Can you say that, TCU, Iowa State, those are first two road games in the Big 12, tough getting out the blocks on those, will be okay? Or is this a troubling trend? And we'll see more of that from this. Road games are tough. Street fights, I think, is the phrase that Sampson and company say the most in reference to a road game, especially in the Big 12. But you got to win some of these. Again, you got to win all your home games and about half of your road games to win this conference in the regular season. This is a big one for a number of reasons. It also knocks Kansas down, but takes away one of their home victories. Now, Houston, and this is my final point on what's at stake here. Houston is growing into a blue blood. And you and I have both kind of felt it for a while. I was thinking this is more of an off-season full episode kind of conversation, so we may have it. But Houston's got more Final Fours than any other school in the state of Texas as we currently speak. Maybe adding to that soon. Houston's got a number of all-pros, a couple different guys in the NBA All-75. Right? Houston had 2 first-round picks last year. Houston will have multiple coaches in the Basketball Hall of Fame whenever they induct Kelvin Sampson. Right? Houston, also from a history teacher perspective, is the school that brought you Don Chaney and Elvin Hayes, right? And integrated schools in the South in an interesting way, using sports to do so, obviously. And frankly, it was felt far too late by the 60s when it happened, but it was also well before a lot of schools in the state of Texas and across the South had done so, right? I say all that to say that as Houston grows into a blue blood, playing other blue bloods carries weight. It just does. And it's just like how, we'll talk in the second segment, Kansas played Kentucky to start the year. If you want to be the team that gets to schedule those giant marquee matchups in November, the ones that get all the sexy TV dollars and and attract all the recruiting and all those things, I could argue with about how important those things are, aren't, or whatever. If you want a shot at having that argument and actually getting to debate that, you got to start beating the blue bloods kind of regularly to prove you are one. I think Houston's got a really good case to be one. I don't think it's a very difficult case to make. But it starts with these wins. Because you don't have them, that's fairly empty. It weighs a lot in the briefcase to add these wins in. And if you don't, your briefcase might be a little light. Now, I want to talk some in the second segment about Kansas's year thus far. Kansas is a really good team, obviously playing in the state of Kansas, but they're not the only really good team. I guess Kansas City's technically in Missouri from the state of Kansas playing a championship feeling game this February because Kansas City and the Chiefs are playing the Super Bowl, and that is obviously a real championship game, not a feels like championship game. But that is a week from this weekend, and FanDuel has all the kinds of stuff to keep you on top of the game. Right, Super Bowl is a fun time. I'm a weirdo about the Super Bowl. I'm very much a don't talk to me. I want to see every second of everything guy about Super Bowl, but I still want the full Super Bowl spread in front of me, all the wings and the pizzas and all of it. I want to feel all that food for the next 2 or 3 days. I want that kind of a meal. But I will also say that when I'm looking to add a little bit more fun, the place to it's FanDuel, because right now, if you have a $5 bet that hits, they're giving back $200 in bonus bets for each one of those when you first sign up. So go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. They got all kinds of different props, coin tosses, national anthem lengths, you name it, they got it. FanDuel.com/lockedon, LOCKEDON today. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so Kansas's season, as we learn our opponent, and I think it's important to learn our opponent. Kansas's season has been an interesting one. They opened the year, big win over Kentucky to start the season. Okay, Kansas is back. They won it all in 2022. Looks like they're going to make a run and get another one in 2024. A lot of guys, frankly, that were young on the 2022 team are still on the 2024 team. That's a little nuts, right? And then, right, Kansas comes at the gates after that and flatly stumbles. Just a few days later, I guess it's exactly a week later, they lose to Marquette on a neutral floor. Now, Marquette's good, but I don't think anyone thought they were Kentucky good. It was an interesting loss, to say the least. And maybe it was still feeling high off the Kentucky win or whatever. Then they turn around and have a rough but close win against Tennessee just the next day, right? And looking at this scheduling, what's interesting is that Marquette is kind of the only real stumble you could say in the non-con, right? Missouri, they won a close one. I would chalk that up to rivalry game kind of stuff. Indiana, that's a close one. It was at Indiana, and I would mark down how difficult that a place that is to play, and winning there at all, no matter how ugly it is a win. But then Big 12 play started for Kansas, and they started on Saturday, January 6th, just like we did. We blew the doors off of West Virginia, and they beat TCU by 2 points with a very controversial call in the final 50 seconds of that game to award them those 2 points. Right? If you don't remember that one, Hunter Dickinson, the center from Kansas, took an elbow to the face, kind of as people were boxing out. TCU is pushing a fast break down the other end. Looks like they're going to get a dunk out of it. That play is called dead. They have to go back. Kansas then gets flagrant foul, 2 free throws in the ball. Kansas ultimately again wins by 2 with all of that happening in the final 50 seconds. I'm, for what it's worth, if you want my basketball coach's opinion, I'm not saying don't review the flagrant foul. I took issue with the fact that they blew the play dead instead of waiting for the basket to score their next dead ball or to go check it out, right? Or like for the advantage to stop, right? Fast break was going on. Like if they got slowed down to half court, okay, then let's call a referee timeout or whatever, right? That's not what they did. Kansas, however, did follow that up with a big fat loss to Central Florida. Now, it was on the road, but it was lost to Central Florida. They came back and beat Oklahoma State. Both teams, I'd say, handily. Oklahoma's 12-point win, but Oklahoma's decent this year, right? Been ranked pretty high at different points of the year. And then Kansas went on the road and lost to West Virginia. Yes, the same West Virginia that Houston blew the doors off of to open the season. Kansas followed up with a close win against Cincinnati in Lawrence, Kansas, and then proceeded to lose in Ames, Iowa, to Iowa State, the same place Houston would take their first loss of the season. And so that back and forth has been interesting to watch for me because it's hard to get a real read on which Kansas is the real Kansas. Now, I watched some of that Kentucky game because it was at the start of the year. I remember watching that like, oh man, this is like, I get to watch these almost like a scout. There's a whole different aspect of watching these kind of games as now that we're in the Big 12, right? I remember that's a was a really good game. I watched Central Florida game because I was eager to watch how Central Florida attacked them. And then I watched some of the Oklahoma State game. To be fair, I picked Oklahoma State and Central Florida because I wanted to see what they would look like for us later too. Get a little double duty going on there, right? Um, Interestingly enough, it is worth noting that all of Kansas's losses have been on the road or neutral. Yes, they barely beat TCU. Yes, they barely beat Cincinnati. But each of those losses has been on the road or neutral away from Lawrence, Kansas. And Houston's got to go into Lawrence, Kansas this weekend. So maybe it don't matter, right? Maybe those losses don't matter because you're playing them in Lawrence or whatever, right? Things that stick out watching them on film as a team, if we're sticking on the team part of this, is that they share the ball incredibly well. They I didn't realize it was the top, but it was very clearly going to be one of the top when you watch them. They have the highest assist percentage in college basketball. That means the percentage of the field goals that come off of an assist, they lead all of college basketball in. I figured in watching them was going to be near the top when I looked up the stat. It was on Ken Palm as the number one in the country, right? Interestingly enough, they're near the bottom of all of college basketball, like in the bottom 25 of all of Division One basketball in non-steal turnovers, which is interesting because it's like, well, Park, what's that mean? When you watch them, they don't put a whole lot of ball pressure on you out at midcourt or as you're inside the 25-foot line, or whatever. They contest shots to their length and will sag off you otherwise. And what's interesting, we'll get to match them in a second, is they're all really tall and long. So I don't mean to say that's not a good strategy. But what that means is that unless they get a steal because they have those long arms in the passing lane, you can kind of start to run your offense because truthfully, they're not going to make you like ball pressure to the way Houston will double team a guy and he'll throw the ball out of bounds or something because he's just flustered and he thinks his guy's back cutting, whatever. They don't get those kind of pressure turnovers very often at all. Kansas shoots the three extremely well. That's also gotten beaten several times this year, including Central Florida and including West Virginia, although admittedly that's one I didn't watch very closely. I was just kind of paying attention to when it was happening. Kansas shoots three really well, but also has a lot of games where their opponents shoot three really well. So you can see how that may work actually in Houston's favor because Houston defends the three so well that you got to imagine Kansas will come a little bit down to earth in that category, even if it's not as low as Houston's averages are because Kansas is really good. Somewhere in the middle there, you imagine Kansas gets pulled down to. And if they're allowing a lot of threes made per game, a lot of high percentage shots from three, that could help Houston with a number of different shooters they got on their roster. Jamal Shedd shooting the ball well this year. LJ Cryer and Emmanuel Sharp are both legacy shooters. They've had a rough couple of games, but could get them back on track. Right. This is an interesting one to watch from those perspectives. And I think that those kind of trends all make me think that it will be a close game, it will be a competitive game, it will be a tight game. It's a difficult place to play. But I'm feeling really good about Houston's chances in this one because of the lack of ball pressure out of Kansas, because Houston implements the most ball pressure in America, right? I'm really good about this one because they allow a lot of made threes in their losses, and Houston can hit those things in bunches, right? We talked at one point on social media, I think it was, about like dagger rate, kill shot rate, et cetera, where you go like 3 or 4 possessions in a row hitting jump shots or like, 8-0 runs, 9-0 runs. Houston does that as well as anyone in America statistically. That's not just me saying it. And if they're going to leave open threes, does that mean they're going to get a bunch of those kind of runs? Now, in the third segment, I want to talk some about matchups because I think ultimately that's where this game's going to be won and lost is in the Jimmys and Joes, not a whole lot of X's and O's. And there's one player that I have to admit, if you've been paying attention, you know he's got my heartstrings. But we got to talk about the matchups. All right, so in this game, the marquee, the thing ESPN is selling, all of that jazz is DeJuan Harris versus Jamal Shedd. DeJuan Harris was last year's Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. You could argue offensively he's ahead of the snake for them. He and Wade Taylor IV are probably the two best point guards Houston's played all season. It might be the two best point guards they play all season long. Max Abmas has a great score. He's a great scoring point guard. He's got a great jump shot. But on the whole, I would say DeJuan Harris is a lot better. I would also argue Wade Taylor's a lot better. And I'd also argue Jamal Shedd's a lot better. And that's what makes this matchup fun. Think about how much fun it was to watch Wade and Jamal go back and forth in that A&M game. This game will be like that, except that DeJuan Harris has a lot more help around him, right? He's explosive. He's aggressive. I think what's an underrated skill from him in watching him play is, much like their other guys, he shoots the three ball extremely well. He shoots it a lot less than other guys in their roster, but he's shooting 45% from three per game, right? Doesn't shoot a whole lot of them. Shoots just two, it looks like, in most games, but he's going to make one of the two. And so I worry that if Houston treats him as a non-shooter to try and help cover up other things other guys do, that he could get hot, right? Continue at 45% and go, 3 for 6, and all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, what happened, right? Defensively, he's obviously going to get Jamal. Jamal's going to get him. That's a tough matchup for both guys defensively. But it's also probably two guys that are competing for Conference Defensive Player of the Year, right? So we'll see how that matches up. I'm taking Jamal. I'm always taking Jamal. Shout out to Maynard. Interestingly enough, is the 2-guard, 3-guard lineup, the spot. They've recently changed the lineup there in Kansas, and that's where I think things get a little interesting. They got two guys. Kevin McCullough, 6'7". Johnny Furphy is 6'9". They're both true guard perimeter type guys, right? Now, McCullough is like probably competing with his own teammate DeJuan Harris for Defensive Player of the Year last year. He's long. He's a classic like 3-and-D guy. That's what he'll project to in the pros. Shooting 35% on threes, 4.5 attempts per game. Not a great shooter off the dribble, but he is leading them in points. Right, they're going to try and get him involved in actions, and then he can get downhill with that length some too. Johnny Furphy, their other guard, is 6'9". He's listed him at 200 pounds. He looks really thin to me. He's a true sharpshooter, like going to kill you in the corners kind of guy. He's shooting 42.6 from three, a lot less attempts per game, but also has recently been inserted in the starting lineup. And so you can see him, frankly, get more as a starter than he was coming off the bench. So those two guys, I think, are interesting matchups because they're so much bigger than Houston's guys, right? 6'7" and 6'9". Houston's other two perimeter guys they play are 6'2" and 6'5"-ish, right? I think I would put Emmanuel Sharp on Kevin McCullough, a little bit bigger body, a little bit more explosive threat, a guy that you can't let get hot. Emmanuel Sharp's got the size, kind of like bang with them a little bit. I think that's what I would do there. And then that puts LJ Cryer on Johnny Furphy. I also, however, get that Cryer is 2 inches short, 2 or 3 inches shorter than Sharp, and Furphy is 2 inches taller than McCullough on their listing. And so I can see how like that adds up to a 5-year window that you might not have to deal with and invert this. I worry about McCullough kind of knocking Cryer around because he's a much stronger guy. I will say on the inverse that Emmanuel Sharp could probably shove Furphy around too defensively. So could be their own, we'll win this matchup and lose that one kind of thing. I don't know. Or maybe LJ Cryer does a great job covering whichever one he is, right? The center, if the point guard matchup is not the thing that's going to sell the marquee in this game, it's going to be center matchup. Hunter Dickinson, Michigan transfer, was the prize guy in the transfer portal last offseason. 7'2", shoots about 50% from three. Doesn't shoot a lot per game this year, but has a great jump shot. A little slow-footed, but giant frame, very skilled, very technical, right? But has the size to then like just be a brute force too. Javier Francis will get that matchup as a true center. Javier is giving up 6 inches in listed height, right? That's a lot. Javier will make up for it some with his long wingspan. For instance, Javier Francis' 7'5" wingspan is longer than Hunter Dickinson's, actually at 7'2", so he's giving up 6 inches in height, but just wingspan to wingspan, he's actually got more inches there. Now, wingspan I have to add to height to get up to block shots, but You got me. I think France has done such a great job playing along the perimeter that when Kansas wants to get in their kind of stuff where they turn Dickinson into a passer, because he is a very, very talented passer along the perimeter, you can actually let Javier go play out there. He does a good job. He's done a good job the last couple of games. I mentioned, I guess, most notably in the Provo BYU game, but it's not the only time, obviously, either. So I think that's really important to make sure we watch that development. I also, for what it's worth, think that you have to have JVR there because you're going to want J1 in the other matchup. JVR is your true center. I think when it's his turn to come out and you put JoJo Tugler in, I think I'd also put JoJo on Hunter Dickinson, ? People might think I'm crazy there because JoJo is the youngest player in the Big 12, and Hunter Dickinson might be Big 12 Player of the Year this year if Kansas goes on a run or something. But the athleticism that he brings, Tugler, I think will A, negate some of the savviness, but B, kind of drive Dickinson wild. Now I could see if you brought in JoJo and flipped him with J1, let J1 cover him and put JoJo on the power forward, I could get that right. But all in all, I think Javier is going to have to play really well in this matchup and win, at least keep this one competitive. Dickinson has second most points per game for them, really important player for them, right? The bench, Houston wins, almost running away. Kansas plays just 7 guys. Only 7 players in the roster have 18 or more minutes per game, and they've made a change in the starting lineup, and it's still the case. No one outside of those 7 has more than 12 minutes per game. Those guys with like 7, 8, 9 minutes are all playing mostly in like large chunks of blowouts. The 2 guys they do pull off the bench are both guards. They'll put in multiple guards and go smaller, and pull that way they can have floor spacing and different looks. Do a lot of different because of the versatility of that size they have in starting lineup, they can do a lot of different things with looks without having to change personnel necessarily. Marco Jackson and Nicholas Timberlake are the 2 guys that come in. Now, I do look at these 2 guys as threats, as energy guys, as important basketball players. They play good defense. They do a lot of good things for Kansas. They're not the typical come off the bench and shoot some threes, microwave kind of guys by a stretch. They both are, when they're in the game, typically the worst three-point shooting guy outside of KJ Adams on the floor, right? And so, I think that Houston wins the bench battle there because A, they go deeper, B, they have more impactful guys, and C, they can keep fresh legs by hitting that bench if the game gets to a chippy foul trouble kind of game. Houston's got more bodies that they use and have frankly used in these close games before, right? So that's where I'm leaning on that one. The last matchup I hadn't talked about yet is because it's the one that just tears at me the most. J1 Roberts, our Houston Cougar power forward, is going to cover KJ Adams. KJ Adams is a guy that at 6'7" was their small ball center a year ago before Hunter Dickinson transferred in, and is now playing the power forward spot. He is not a shooter. 0 for 2 for 3 on the year. I think he was 2 of 15 his first 15 free throws on the season. He's leveled that out to his credit since then. I think he's up into the low 60s now. So if you start percentages, to pull that up, it's a lot, right? He'll have games where he shoots literally 100% because he has 6 dunks. I mean, he's that type of energy guy. He is. If Ramon Walker were 6'7" and sculpted by, at a marble like a Greek god, that's KJ. Now, J1 is much more talented basketball player, much more savvy basketball player. Both of them are tremendous passers. You see both teams use them in a high post passing role. Both teams embody culture so much. I do want to pull up a Kelvin Sampson quote on KJ because I think it helps get to the core of what I'm trying to say here. Let me pull this up. I just had Houston coach Kelvin Sampson of KJ Adams says he's the most underrated player in America, and adds that if he was a washcloth and you just wring him out, it would just flood with winner. He's just a winner. KJ was a freshman when Kansas won the whole thing 2 years ago, and he played very little. He was a freshman, but Kansas up a basket in the final seconds of the national championship game, put KJ on the floor to help play defense after having sat for the majority of that 40 minutes to be on the floor playing defense for that instant. He's that kind of a basketball player, that kind of an intense guy. And if you've been following me more personally, I got this tie to KJ. KJ's mom was a impactful teacher in my life. I went to a new private middle school in Austin. We just got into town a little bit before that. New private school. I'm not sure where I'm fitting in. And she just made sure I had a place to be. Right. She knew, hey, this kid's like basketball, and she made sure I had people watching out for me. Right. My mom worked at a different private school in the area, and people knew one another. And anyway, she was a great, great woman. And unfortunately, I say she was a great woman because she passed away after a second bout with cancer last fall. Really sad moment. I took a moment of weeks ago at this point on the podcast to talk about it. She was a really powerful teacher and coach. The kind of person that aspires you to be a teacher and coach, frankly, a really powerful teacher and coach. KJ was always around. I got to watch KJ play basketball as an itty bitty kid playing for Next Level. People don't even know what that means, but a little Next Level club in Austin. And back in the Next Level, I actually got to coach one of his summer teams for a while at a camp and stuff like that. Anyway, Next Level basketball, we would legitimately just take the rebound, just chunk the ball. As soon as you got the ball, just chunk it deep. KJ's going to run and go get it. We're just blindly throw the ball deep. KJ's the fast guy in the gym. He's going to go get it, right? KJ, his mom, Miss Coach Adams, she played basketball at A&M, was a baller. Like, go look at their statistical history. I mean, Yvonne Hill at the time was a baller. His dad was a football player that played for the Warriors. That's where all the athletics. I mean, his sister played volleyball at SMU. I mean, that's an athletic family. I don't know what the future of KJ's basketball holds after Kansas. As much as I want and will root for and believe Houston wins this matchup, KJ will always have a fan in me. And that makes this one awesome because I get to watch KJ and I get to watch Houston. It's all at the same time in Lawrence, and it's a very cool experience. It also makes it really challenging because kind of outside of things that impact Houston, I've always rooted for KJ in my life. And so it's really weird to watch that whole thing break down. But I want KJ to have a great game. I want KJ to play really well. I think the Houston Cougars win this one, and I want them to for a number of reasons, but I think they win this game. I think they win a close one in Lawrence, get the heck out of Dodge, come on home. I think they do it on Saturday. Game tips off at 3 o'clock local time. It's 3 o'clock Central time, I should say, on ESPN. It's sandwiched right there between the Carolina Dukes, the world, and everything else. Houston wins. Houston proves they're blue blood. Houston takes control of the Big 12. If you disagree with me, think I'm crazy, think I got something else going on between my ears, tell me in the comments down below, as you do each and every day. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Coogs your first, at this point, second as well. Listen of the day. Locked On Coogs is a primary Locked On package and everything. It's your team, our Coogs, every day. Go Coogs.